That's right. We're right here, Sharp Facets Gallery this morning, and as promised, I have former Senator Jim DeMint from the great state of South Carolina giving us a call to talk about his book, Falling in Love with America Again. He's now CEO of the Heritage Foundation. How you doing today, Jim?
And I'm doing great, and actually I'm in South Carolina today for one day, so I'm glad to be home.
I'll bet you are. You know, looking at the cover of your book, you know, I got to say, Falling in Love with America Again, and then there's this great picture of you.
Actually, the background was what we wanted to emphasize with kind of a house in a small town with a flag out front, and just to get the idea of how blessed we are to be Americans.
I know, but I think you kind of overtook it, Jim.
I'm afraid so.
Well, that is terrific. You know, I spent the weekend really reading your book and going through. I got lots of pages marked and everything. And one of the things that I noticed, Jim, is that you talk a lot about different states that are really making a difference in returning to smallness and returning things to the platoons that you talk about in your book. I wondered how you thought South Carolina is doing.
Well, we're making some progress in some areas. We're expanding on the school choice a little by little, even though there is resistance from some of the bigs, and that's something I talk about in the book a lot. Big government, big unions, big corporations, big banks, and I'm trying to dispel the illusion that big government might help the little guy, but the success stories of poor, disadvantaged children finding an opportunity by getting a better education. We're seeing that start to happen in many places in South Carolina and all around the country, but the teachers' unions are fighting it, and they've got some of the politicians from the president down trying to help them stop that.
That's true, and I think that would be an interesting point to expand on a little bit, how the bigs control things by when politicians start getting help with their elections because they put money in for special interest. And what actually happens there? You're talking about teachers' unions here and how that becomes almost a monopoly for the teachers.
Well, unfortunately, teachers, like other government workers, in a lot of parts of the country are automatically enrolled as union members, whether they like it or not. And their dues for the unions come out of their paycheck whether they like it or not. And those dues primarily go to the Democrat Party. And so the Democrats help fight for centralized education control in Washington, because the last thing the teachers' unions want to do is fight their battles with 50 states. And every time we see successes like you see in New York, you have 4 charter schools helping primarily poor African-American children. You've got a Democrat mayor who's closing them down, even though their test scores are better, the safety records are better, and the parents are happier. They're closing them down because the teachers' unions don't like them. So that's what I do throughout the book, Ann, is to talk about success stories when the right ideas are employed. When we go after our own energy, for instance, North Dakota, since it doesn't have as much federal land as a lot of other states, has been able to go around the federal government, use a new technology called fracking, bring up a lot of natural gas, create thousands and thousands of jobs and better way of life for lots of people, and also helping our country with more energy. So, and we've got good examples on health care, thousands of people who come together voluntarily to insure themselves through Samaritan Health Services. And all of this in the book, Ann, is just contrasted with what's been going on in Washington. Regardless of which party's in control, the federal government is too big to do anything well. In fact, there's corruption, there's waste. Whether you're talking about welfare or Medicaid, food stamps, corporate welfare, there's a lot of that too. It's just not working, and it doesn't help the little guy.
Well, you know, Jim, one of the things that you talk about is some of the bailouts and too big to fail, and should things have been that way. Is the federal government too big to fail?
Uh, well, the problem is the federal government's too big to succeed. And if we keep asking the federal government to do things, like the federal government, the president now saying we're going to help the middle class, we're going to raise the minimum wage, we know that doesn't help the middle class. It hurts the middle class. It eliminates a lot of entry-level jobs, a lot of part-time jobs for teenagers so they can get their toes in the water in the workforce. But they still keep talking like they're going to help people by mandating a new minimum wage. The way to raise wages is like they're doing it in North Dakota. You can start at McDonald's at $15 an hour, sometimes with a hiring bonus, because the economy's good. And that's how you raise wages.
Yes, well, being in business, I know that, but it just doesn't seem like anybody else knows that. You know, one of the things that I was thinking about was in your book, you're very strong about the two-parent family. And, of course, your mother just died here recently. I was very sad to hear that for you. But you actually were raised by a single parent.
Yes, I was, and I have great admiration for single moms. I mean, my wife and I have been married for over 40 years, and we raised four. I don't know how anyone could do it with just one, but my mother had four, and it was tough. But we know, and she would have said, and I think probably every single mom would say, that it's better to raise children in an environment where you've got a mom and a dad, and there are just different characteristics there that I think children need to learn from. And all the statistics show that being raised in a home with a mom and dad minimizes the chances you'll ever be in poverty or drop out of school or end up in jail. And so when we create federal programs that actually discourage two-parent families, which we've done with our welfare programs, because a mom can get some help if she's not married, but if she's married, she's likely to lose a lot of that help that's available. We need to change that. We always need to have safety nets for people because as humans, we're always going to be getting in trouble, having some low times and up times. But we've got people trapped now, and it makes it very hard for them to get off of these programs. If they get a job, they lose their benefits so quickly that they're worse off than if they didn't work at all.
And this doesn't seem to be something from the federal level that we're seeing much change in, though, Jim.
No, it's another part of this. The people in Washington want things centralized in Washington, when in fact we're seeing, and I talk about it throughout the book, that if the more that states can take control of things, and no state's perfect, but if states are forced to compete with other states, we see states now competing for the best education system, even though the federal government is holding them back with programs like Common Core. But we see states competing for the best energy development, again, even though the federal government is restricting in many ways what a lot of states like South Carolina can do. But those are where we have the successes. And what I want people to do when they read the book is realize that, hey, we may have taken a lot of wrong turns in the country, and we may have made the mistake of asking Washington to do things it can't do, but the answers are right in front of us, and it wouldn't take very long to move things out of Washington, to move dollars out of Washington, and actually have a better life, more opportunity, particularly for our children, more jobs, a better economy. So let the federal government do what it should do and is not doing well, and that's defend our country, because there we're losing really a lot of ground.
We certainly are, but how would we pay the $17 trillion debt, Jim?
Well, it's going to be a little at a time. The first thing we have to do is stop creating more debt, and the president's budget would take that debt up significantly over the next several years. We've got to come to the point of balancing the budget. So then we can begin in various ways to bring that debt down little by little, probably over a whole generation. But it's really important that we do that, because as interest rates go back up, and they will, we'll find ourselves pulling money from essential programs like Medicare and Social Security just to pay the debt. And these are programs that people have paid for, and we've promised that they'll be there when they retire. We can't do what we're continuing to do.
What about, what did you think about Paul Ryan's new budget? Well, actually, I don't know if it's a new budget, but Paul Ryan's budget that came out here.
Well, there was a lot of good parts to it, and it created about half the debt of the president's budget. It is important to realize, even though all the media said he cut this and he cut that, he didn't cut anything. He slowed the growth of spending to the point where over a 10-year period we would probably balance. And that's a very slow transitional approach towards a balance, but it's reasonable. And if the other side says that that is radical, we just have to realize if we're not willing to stop spending more than we're bringing in 10 years, we're not going to make it as a country. If people really think you can keep spending more than you're bringing in indefinitely, then we're going to lose this country we love.
I think that's one of the things that we need to understand, isn't it, Jim? I just had a call in from a gentleman, Dave Mannion, and he says yours is a cultural dogma, not the culture of today. You, Jim DeMint, need to recognize it's okay to receive benefits of government. What do you have to say, Jim, about that?
Well, now, exactly what did he say, Ann?
He said that our culture, that the culture of today is not the culture that you talk about. You, Jim DeMint, need to recognize that it's okay to receive benefits of the government.
Well, I'm not saying there's anything evil about it, but I am saying that to a large degree, public charity does not help people over the long period of time. It robs them of their dignity and self-esteem when we encourage people not to work and when we discourage marriage and family formation. It not only hurts those people, it hurts all of us as a society. We need a strong society in order to have a strong America. And what we don't need is to create a system where the expectation is that you're getting government benefits. It needs to be a safety net. It needs to be a last line of defense that the federal government is actually providing public charity. And the way those programs are set up to control people and to keep them dependent on government, when in fact we need to start with families, communities, churches, and states, and then the federal government will have to come in where it needs to. But we just have to realize the federal government can't do it well, it can't afford to do it, and the way they do it has been hurting people for a generation.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. That was just a comment that came in here this morning. And, you know, there are people that actually, because I guess they're getting assistance and everything, they wouldn't want to see that cut. They would be afraid to step off the government.
Well, yeah, sure, and there's every reason to, because if you're on Medicaid and food stamps and welfare and you get a job, you're going to be worse off than you were before. And we have to have a system where you can transition into a job where you can keep some of those benefits while you're working and developing a better salary and more benefits. The way it is now, it discourages people from working. And when people don't work, and I'm talking about able-bodied people, they lose a lot of that self-esteem and dignity that comes with taking care of yourself and your family. And so we don't want to hurt people. In fact, people are being hurt now, and many of the people who are trapped in dependency would like a good job and like a chance to get their hands on the ladder of opportunity, and we need to make sure we make that available.
Sure. I agree with you on that, Jim. Now, you know, you talk about actually what we were just talking about isn't much different than the bigs. I was thinking about, just as an aside, I was thinking about Sex in the City, that series on HBO. They always had Mr. Big, and I kept thinking about Mr. Big, and then you're talking about the bigs in government here. But it's not much different when it comes to businesses and their ability to compete. When you have big businesses that are getting bailouts, or big businesses putting money into the pockets, the unions and everything, that keeps the small business from growing, doesn't it?
It does, and if people will read a few of the chapters here, it'll really open their eyes of what happens in Washington when laws and regulations are written. The bigs have big lobby firms. They work with regulators. They work with congressmen and senators. For instance, the Dodd-Frank legislation that was supposedly going to help the little guy get credit and be protected from the big banks, it was anything but that. Dodd-Frank bailed out the big guys who caused our problems, and then wrote a regulation that made it hard for anyone to compete with them, and the regulations that made it hard for community banks to do business now. And what it did is it protected the big guys. And the same thing with Obamacare. It was not written to help the little guy get insurance. It was written by big insurance companies and big hospitals who thought they were going to get a big windfall when everyone was forced to buy health insurance. We're seeing it's not working out that way, but the bigs are looking out for the bigs. And when the doors close in Washington, it's generally some big union, big corporation, big bank, big lobby firm that's writing the legislation. And it's just like for the minimum wage. That sounds like that's helping the little guy, but the people who are pushing it are the big unions, because their contracts are based on that baseline of minimum wage. And if minimum wage goes up a couple of dollars, then they go back and get their wages raised from $22 to $24. And what it does at the bottom is eliminates a lot of entry-level jobs for other people. So it hurts the little guy, and it helps the big guy.
One of the things that I thought was most interesting that I had no idea about was the backroom deal that you said the Obama administration made with the big hospitals agreeing to support Obamacare in exchange for new restrictions on physician-owned hospitals. I cannot believe this.
It goes on all the time. The little physicians, specialties in their field, are forming hospitals, really centers of excellence, to do different procedures better than they could in a larger hospital. But the big hospitals are trying to get the regulations written to make it harder for physicians to run these smaller specialty hospitals. Again, it doesn't help the little guy. It doesn't help anyone. It helps the bigs. And bigonomics is big in Washington, and that's why 7 of the 10 richest counties in America are in Washington, D.C. It's not because they manufacture something of importance. It's because when power concentrates politically, so does wealth, and so does opportunity. And the president's complaining about the top 1%, but the reason they're getting richer is because government is getting bigger.
So you think that we can turn this around?
Yes, I do, but it's only if the people stop falling for this idea that we're going to elect somebody who's going to fix our problems in Washington. If we can just get people to shake their head and look at the facts, look at what they've done to poverty. They've made it worse. Look at what they've done to education. They've made it worse. Look what they're doing to health care now. They've taken a country with the most energy in the world and made us dependent on our enemies. In our roads, we take more for highways than we have in years, but the money goes from South Carolina to Washington, and then we don't get it back. And what we do get back has all these rules of what you have to do with bike paths and what kind of union workers you have to use. This is just nonsense, and if people will start voting for the ideas that will make their life better, I'm not suggesting people vote for any party, but they need to start looking at it and just realizing if somebody's promising to go to Washington and make life better for you, the only way they're going to do that is through this old concept of federalism, which means the federal government's limited, and we've got 50 states competing for the best schools, the best tax system, the best energy system, the best healthcare system. When that happens, we'll all be better off.
Well, you know, one of the things I was reading in your book, Jim, I love talking to you because I couldn't agree with you more. But I remember a few years ago, whenever you asked a young person about something and they didn't want to talk about it, they said it was complicated.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, you use that term that's what they tell. It's too complicated for us to understand, so they know best for us, the federal government.
It doesn't work that way. When people start making their own decisions, things get simpler. When I was coming up, computers were too complicated for everybody until Apple figured out, hey, I can sell these things to individuals. Then they got real simple. And now if you look at the smartphones and everything, you realize these smartphones are more complicated than the computers that sent our first men to the moon. Yet you can hold them in your hands, and all of us know how to operate them. That's what happens with health insurance. That's what happens with everything when you bring decision-making down where it began. And the main point of the book, Ann, is America was different than any other country because it was built from the ground up by individuals in little platoons, which is what we talk about through the book. It's made up of families and friends and church groups and small businesses where we work. And all over the country, if you let America grow from the ground up, that's why we were different, and that's why we were more prosperous. We need to return to that. It sounds unorganized, but it's the most organized system in the world.
Absolutely. Now, Ben Carson did the foreword on that. He really is a breath of fresh air, isn't he?
He is. He'll tell it like it is in a minute. And he came up the hard way, again, with a single mom, poverty, racism. But he points out that even in his poor community, that he had extended family, he had church groups, he had friends across the street, little platoons that helped protect him and gave him a way to grow up with enough of an opportunity for an education that he could get out and become one of the best-known brain surgeons in the world. So we can make this work without this huge federal edifice that's bankrupting us, and it's basically working for the big guy instead of the little guy.
Yeah, I liked where he said, Jim, he said in the foreword there about the teacher used to shame the white kids for him being so good.
Yeah.
In
well,
school.
The book, I think if people read the book, Ann, they'll be encouraged and they'll feel blessed to be Americans. They'll be reminded that a lot of people who disagree on almost everything can live together and love each other. But when we get one-size-fits-all solutions that are stuffed down our throats, then we start resenting others and we resent our country. That we have to stop. And when we let go of things in Washington and let people do what they think is best, they'll come up with solutions, and we'll be much better off as a country.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. You know, it's kind of like remembering the way things used to be, and you mourn for some of the things that are going by the wayside as this country just keeps changing.
Yeah, and young people should understand this as well as those of us who are older, because now with the internet and smartphones and all this social media, the ability to make your own decisions and have the people you want on your page, and to buy one song rather than having to buy 15 to get the one you want. They are understanding individualism and freedom in a different way. And that's the way we have to help explain to them, you know, why would you want to buy a whole insurance policy that had 15 things in it you didn't want in order to just get something you do want? And so we can't count out our young folks. They understand things, but not in the sense of the Constitution or limited government or balanced budget. They understand it in the context that they live in today.
Sure. I know I got to let you go. The name of the book is Falling in Love with America Again. Jim DeMint has written the book, and it is fantastic. I highly recommend you get it. I have just one last question for you. Mike Rogers, you definitely helped his campaign when he was running before. He is head of the Intelligence Committee. He's stepping down at the end of his term and going to become a radio host. What do you think about that, Jim?
Well, I think he probably understands, unfortunately, what I've seen the last few years is that you can really make a difference on the outside more than you can on the inside. As government's gotten bigger, individual congressmen and senators really don't have that much of a role anymore of actually writing legislation. It's been turned over to the bureaucrats because when you start managing something rather than governing it, it gets too complicated for congressmen and senators to deliberate. And so I'm convinced, and one of the reasons I left is I think we have to win the debate with the American people. You know, Mike can do that on radio as far as reaching people every day. I'm trying to do it all over the country through the Heritage Foundation of help people see those ideas that will make their life better. But that's what we have to restore the federalism so that our representatives in Congress are actually the ones making the decision and writing the legislation rather than the big guys in the back rooms, which is what's happening now. But if we ask Washington to do everything, then the bigs are going to control everything.
So I guess you're having a great time since you've left the Senate, huh?
Well, I am. I'm worn out. I've probably been in 80 or 90 cities in the last year. We're trying to help a lot of state policy groups as well as through Heritage Action organize a lot of people on the ground that have been part of Tea Parties or never been a part of anything political, but they're trying to organize to keep their representatives more accountable and do what Milton Friedman said. We've got to create an environment in this country where even the wrong people will do the right thing once they're elected. And what that means is you've got to have a vigilant population who knows what's going on, and they keep their representatives accountable. Absolutely.
Well, former Senator Jim DeMint from the great state of South Carolina, thanks so much for taking time to call us this morning and talk to us about your new book, Falling in Love with America Again.
Thank you, Ann. Thanks for what you do every day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.